We're on episode 3, ostensibly. I guess we could always reorder these things, though.
No, I hate when they do that. I hate when podcasts do that.
Really?
Yeah, they start 001 and then just redo it when they think they're better. They think they've arrived at a level of professionalism that they finally want the world to see.
And we should embrace our non-professionals.
We are on full display.
Okay, I think I like that philosophy. So in that spirit, can you scooch a little closer to Melody? Yeah, I think I like that a little better, I think. And Melody, can you sit up a little straighter? I noticed that chair causes people to slouch, and Janie was like really laying down as well.
We could grab a pillow.
Getting cozy.
What, you want a pillow behind you?
Fine.
Yeah, just sit up, like lean forward and have your back straight. It just looks way better, I think. But anyway, welcome to the Being in the World morning show with Dr. Patrick House and Mr. Tao Ruspoli and Miss Melody Sample, which has got to be one of the coolest names I've ever heard. And the irony is, when I met you, you had a much more normal sounding name. And for years, I thought that you had this other name. And then you told me, actually, you can start calling me by my real name. And you have this name that's way, way, way more interesting than your real name. People always ask me when I go to Burning Man if Tao is my playa name. And it always really annoys me to think that I would just make up the name Tao and I always wanted to make the name Bob for Burning Man and then be Tao the rest of the time. That's a little bit what you did in your life, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, I created an identity in order to allow myself to explore different facets of my experience, and then that was over, and I was wanting to integrate into myself again.
I've just realized how many, you're kind of an illusionist, because when I met you, it was a dinner party, and you and your friend / partner were ostensibly dinner guests at this dinner party of like some friends in Venice, and then suddenly they get up, and Melody starts tying the other woman up with this incredible Shibari Japanese rope tying, and turns out that they weren't dinner guests. I mean, they were dinner guests, but they were also
You were planted
to perform this like unexpected and exotic ritual. Can you talk a little bit about your kind of the Shibari world and how you got into it and what it means?
Yeah, I mean, I started exploring Shibari from the bottom, from being tied.
What is Shibari for people who don't know what it is?
Shibari is Japanese-styled rope bondage. And at the time, I was exploring kink in general as a way of like self-expression and release, and things like bondage and pain, come together in this really wonderful way in Shibari, which allows for a lot of release and a lot of self-exploration as far as like the darker parts of oneself, and even like releasing trauma was like really helpful for. And I really enjoyed it, but I was having trouble finding the person to tie me regularly, and so I just became the rope top that I was looking for in a way. I just learned so much from being on the inside of the rope, and it was a natural progression to learn. And I started tying myself for a short period of time, but it's like masturbation. It's only it can take you so far. It's fun, but it's more fun with another person, or more than one other person.
That's how I feel about playing music. When you play music alone, it's going to be wonderful, but it is as limited as masturbation is, in the sense that you don't have that surprise of what the other person, the unexpected thing that the other can do that you have to respond to.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to that. You became the thing you wanted because you couldn't find it. Mm-hmm. I feel like I do that all over, right? There's so many times in life. Well, you look around the world for a thing that you either grew up in childhood imagining or thinking that the adult world would be like, and then when it just never meets your standards. This is like that's Don Quixote 101. The world is different than your romantic imagination of it, and you just can't find it, so you have to become the thing. You have to become the thing that you want. How long did that last?
About 3 minutes, I guess.
Which part? Which part?
The part of tying myself. The time is the process of learning to tie somebody else was like, it really elevated it, right? Because of what you're talking about. There's only like, you can anticipate what you're going to do. You can't anticipate what somebody else is going to do, even if they think they know what the experience is going into rope. They will get surprised, which can then inform the decisions that I make as far as where we're going in the rope. And for me, rope has become more of a meditation tool than an erotic tool. I use rope a lot in order to like experience this deep amount of intimacy and trust, which almost at like 90% of the time that I tie doesn't go in a sexual direction. It's just very grounding, very meditative, very present. You have to be present with the process of process of tying because safety is involved and so much trust. So I enjoy it quite a bit, but now at this point in my journey, it's much more private than it once was.
There was someone left that copy of the D.H. Lawrence book with the two women. I've forgotten what it's called. It's supposed to be his best book. But I just read the introduction, and there was all this stuff about how he was worried that the book was going to be banned in the United States for eroticism, and that just was a charge in its own right. And he said, and he just dared question, like, if it is erotic, yeah, so isn't that okay? So I mean, is the eroticism that you strip away from it? Does it gain something from taking the eroticism away, or I don't know? I'm very interested in the relationship between our relationships and erotic desire.
I think
it's a huge topic, but
yeah, and it's also something that people are very curious about immediately. It's like, how do you take the eroticism out of such an erotic act?
Yeah.
And I can't say that I take it out. It's just more integrated than a sexual act, you know?
That's very well said. Yeah, I like that.
It's spiritual and mental, and so the process of tying then becomes very nuanced, and the charge should be there.
Yeah.
And if it's not, I'm not as invested. So I look for the charge. But for me, there's a wonderful tension that can be built and released within that conversation of the experience of rope. Say it lasts 45 minutes. And the release is like the untying process, which is always my favorite. It's like we get to a point where, like, I usually tie women, where I can get the woman to like really like feel into the rope, where they're so wrapped up, and they find a moment of like right where it feels uncomfortable, where like, oh, this is new. Oh, I'm a little bit distracted by how uncomfortable that is. And then we can sit in that for a minute. And then the release from that is this wonderful relaxation process at that point. That's my favorite point, is like this melting into the ground, this like melting away from the rope, and kind of a full surrender experience to me is, you know, it's not the same thing as an orgasm, but it does tell a similar story.
You said that when you have rope in your hands, you said this earlier, like something different happens, something comes over you. You can no longer kind of listen to other people's wants. Can you talk about that moment? Like, what happens at that moment when rope is placed in your hand?
I feel my most dominant as soon as rope gets into my hands, and I'm very much a switch and very much love energy exchange. But when I have rope in my hands, there's not a whole lot that can throw me off of like being in control. And some of that has to do with the need to be so focused on the person that I'm tying that their every like safety is that I can, because I'm infallible, or, you know, I'm not. And so in that way, I need to have as much control as possible. in order to be able to focus on the person that I'm tying. But I would definitely say that I am taking other people's desires, wants, and needs into consideration. The person that I'm tying, my whole world becomes about that one person, no matter if there are other people around or not. That everything revolves around the experience that they're having and the experience that I'm having through being attentive to that.
So your attention shifts to them in
Fully.
a kind of nurturing way, in a sense. You're caring about them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I only tie people now at this point that I have a very strong connection with. It is very much like an intimacy, trust.
Patrick, have you thought about getting tied up by Melody?
I've not thought about it.
Would you?
I've, of course, imagined it.
What's the difference between thought about it and imagined it?
Thought about it seems a bit more intentional. Like I went through the plan and steps of imagining how it might happen and done like operational kind of steps to make sure it's more likely to happen. Imagined it as something that I have no control over, that sometimes your brain does like just these counterfactual things where it's like, don't think of a white elephant. Right, you are obviously thinking about a white elephant. Yeah. Don't think about being tied up right now, Tao. You're obviously thinking about being tied up. So I, just the words that she says are impinging on my brain and causing me to, of course, imagine this.
Melody, would you? Do you think you'd enjoy tying up Patrick?
Well, I do have. So this is the thing: is would I enjoy it? I would enjoy tying Patrick if he really wanted me to, and he was willing to submit, which I'm not sure that Patrick is there, because I don't tie people who aren't willing to submit to me anymore. That I made that mistake many times.
What happened? What happens in that mistake?
Well, they're topping from the bottom essentially. Like they're expecting, so somebody who's very dominant who then gets in rope expects to hold on to control. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard to hold into control when you're completely bound. And the most simple thing then that I do can be upsetting to somebody who's trying to hold on to control in rope, because for me, I immediately go to like playful areas, power structure areas. When I am tying someone, it is a power exchange for me. And I just, when I was in the beginning of my experience with tying other people, I took it for granted that I was able to separate that. I was like, oh, well, I can just tie this person for aesthetics, for, because they want to get tied and I really want to tie. And I made those concessions in order to have the experience that I thought we were both looking for. But what was true was I was looking for an energy exchange in which I was in control. I have the rope in my hands. It's a little bit more like clear for me now that that's a need for myself, just to be the person that's in control and be giving that experience.
Could each of you try and psychoanalyze, or what's the neuroscientist version of psychoanalyze?
Psychoanalyze.
Okay. The cliche is like the CEO who wants to be, wants to submit because he has so much power in his outside life that he gets turned on, submitting in his sexual life. And I imagine it's often this reversal of people who are in charge in regular life and like to submit, or feel very out of control in their regular life and like to be dominant. And then I'm sure there's times where it aligns, right? People who are very in control and like to dominate and bring that level of control into the bedroom. Do you have any thoughts, each of you, on what's going on there in the relationship between the outside world and the intimate sexual world?
Mine's very simple. I would like, if you can figure out how to get me tied, you're allowed to. But I just would never let it happen. But if you figure out a way to me, it's like, if you can actually do that, it's an actual display of dominance. Like if you can get to the point where I have somehow become unable to not be tied, then you've earned the right to.
So you need to tie him first, metaphorically, basically.
No, I mean like physically, like it wouldn't work other than I'd have to be like tricked or trapped, some sort of bear trap situation.
Oh, wow.
Well, like,
that really brings in the question of consent.
like that you've earned it.
That you've earned it. I think there's a flaw. I mean, this is personal, so I mean,
Yeah, it's like everyone has their own favorite color. Everyone has their own version of this kind of like where they seek power and where they relinquish power, right?
Yeah.
And the versions of that. There's social, there's financial, there's economic, and there's just pure strength, right?
Right.
I've had this long ago, an ex-partner where the dream was if and when we got married, she would basically just run off. So at the wedding day, she would just run off into the forest. And my job was I could marry her if and only if I caught up to her. Was able to find her.
So I guess you didn't.
We didn't get that far. But so it's like, I don't know. I guess I personally, I grew up in this like kind of nest of Navy SEALs. And Navy SEALs have this attitude that if for whatever reason you cannot, imagine you're trying to be taught something. Like you've probably tried to teach a lot of people rope. It's probably extremely frustrating because you have to meet them slightly above the level that they're at in order to be instructional. You can't start exclusively at the level that you are. But the kind of SEAL ethos is you win if you can win. If you deserve to win, you win. If you're young and just bad at a thing, that is your fault. Mm-hmm. If you are small, if you are weak, you lose, you deserve to lose. And so there's a sense in which I think power, the power that I like, especially with these dynamics, is just simply like, if you can do it, you've earned the right to do it.
Just contemplating this.
Definitely personal. But so when I first started getting tied, the first time I was tied by a partner, and actually the first couple of years that I was exploring that, I felt similarly as if I wanted to be caught. Right. I felt like there was a struggle there that I wanted to experience. I didn't want to just like offer it up and have, there was like a feeling of wanting to be taken. Yeah, it's a little problematic in the long run. And there's something, and that's why I don't tie people unless they're willing to kneel at my feet and offer me their wrists and say, I'm down for this ride. I don't fight anybody for it. I don't try to convince anybody for it. In fact, I don't even care because I have the people that trust me. And I like that kind of like, so you're on your own with that, basically. I'm not gonna try to like you know, there's also there for myself, I really enjoy the feminine nature of connection with the rope. So I guess we're talking about like personal experiences. But to go back to your question, I think that for myself, being like needing so much control in my regular life, like in a lot of different ways, whether it's rope or the kitchen, like I love that feeling of control. I need a lot of not control in the bedroom. Like I love that.
So you like submitting as well. You're able to, and when the rope comes in, you become dominant, and when the rope goes away, you submit.
In my sexuality, I'm a lot more submissive.
Yeah. And
rope at this point isn't just about sexuality, isn't about an act. It's, like I said, more integrated than that. It's a meditative practice that has elements of sexuality supporting it, but is more of a spiritual experience for me.
Yeah.
So you're playing the role of interlocutor instead of opening up.
Oh,
you ever been tied up?
I have never been tied up, and I actually, I think of myself as primarily dominant, but I would like to explore a more submissive side. I think sometimes I don't know. There's been times where like it's been kind of subtly brought about, and I haven't taken to it in those circumstances, but I think I could. And I think as I get older, I just also become more comfortable in exploring different aspects of my sexuality, my feminine side, and I would love to get to the point where I could feel like I would want it. So I don't think I'm a bit like you. I don't think I want it yet, but I'd like to get to the point where I do want it so that I can have that experience, you know? Like I always try foods that I hate in the hope that I can learn to like them. So I'll eat, like, I hate blue cheese, and I don't like that I hate blue cheese, right? It's the opposite of, I remember talking to a little 5-year-old kid who once said, I hate spinach, and I'm glad I hate spinach, because if I liked spinach, I'd eat it, and I hate it. And
don't use 5-year-old kid analogies in this.
Oh yeah, I thought about food only here.
Do you nibble, or do you like embrace the thing?
No. I nibble in the hopes of teaching my palate to enjoy something.
So
right?
The way that I did this when I was first trying Scotch, and I hated the like very smoky, peaty Scotches. I bought the bottle that I least liked for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to drink the whole thing and understand what it is that I didn't like, because to me it's just as important to be able to define things you don't like as things you do. And often people will, when they dislike something, just dabble or just taste, but they won't have the like discrimination ability to then know why they like the thing that they like, unless they go all in on the thing that they don't like.
Right. And there's a big question of like, you know, like when you're a kid and you try beer, it tastes horrible, and then it starts to taste good, and then I always wonder, did you learn to like that horrible taste, or does it taste different to you now? You know, and I think, you know, your palate just gets more complex, and you're able to appreciate these tastes that aren't obviously good. And so that's hopefully the same thing happens with sexuality as you mature and explore new things, and you learn to appreciate things that other people just don't, or psychedelics too, where you like, to me it's a deeply uncomfortable situation to find myself in, like tripping on LSD. I actually don't enjoy it.
To me, that's my mind tied up, and I dislike it immensely.
I love it.
There's that. Yeah, there's just a.
Some people are just like able, like love living up control, and again, I would like to get to the point, you know, spiritually, emotionally, where I can relinquish control. I think about the fact that it's the opposite, that people who are often very dominant or in control in their lives are the ones who want to submit. So I think, well, if I'm dominant, does that mean that I'm actually feeling a total loss of control in the rest of my life? Maybe so.
One year for my partner's birthday, the same Into the Forest partner, actually. I think she was turning 29. And so we did a thing where for 29 seconds on a cyclical repeat, it was timed though, for 29 seconds on a loop, I would let her do what she wanted to me. And so it was 29 seconds, and then I could do whatever, then it would revert back to default, where I got to do whatever I wanted. But then it would be these brief snippets of just on her birthday, aligning with the age that she is, 29 seconds at a time. And those intervals, fucking hated. The only way I was able to get through those 29-second intervals was just knowing that when it ended, so it's this
29
you got the
seconds.
tape so short.
Whoa. Can let me rewind for a second. 29 seconds isn't long. So what did you hate so much about it? I'm curious.
It was simply that I felt restrained. So I felt restrained in a way, even though there were no ropes, there was no physical restraint. I had like intellectually promised, and as the gift, effectively, the birthday gift, promised that I would kind of relinquish control. And so I think, but the thing that's interesting to me is that I knew deep down that at any time I could have it back. And so if I was physically inferior or in a situation where I wasn't actually able to grab it back when I wanted, I have no idea if I would have been able to find that comfortable or not.
I'm
glad you're taking off your glasses. Let's get real here. Stop hiding behind those.
Ready to drop in a little bit here, because I find this topic to be really interesting, because anybody who is in a relationship submitting is always capable of taking the agreement. Works because the person who's submitting is agreeing to it. Like that's why the dominant submissive experience works. And at any point, that person has the power to take it back. Now, as a society, we've trained our women to inherently take a submissive role, even if we think that's different now that we're all like enlightened and feminist. It's not. Like we're taught from a very young age to be nice, to like defer, and to doubt in a lot of ways. Our intelligence, our ability to make choice et cetera, like that our emotions are like a detriment, all of these things that like embed women with a sense of submission or inferiority or both. And I think it's interesting when men start looking at like what it means to be submissive, they almost put onto themselves this like almost unnecessary amount of expectation or like rigidity around what that means. So like you're saying, I hated it because I had to submit, and so I had to let it happen. So that tells me either you weren't actually submitting, you were just playing a role, or your partner wasn't actually dominating, she was just playing a role, or both. Because dominance isn't just about like stepping on you and telling you that you're a piece of shit. Dominance is about like extending energy in a way that like invites consent, A, and B, allows the person to submit, because submission should be a surrender, should be a giving in, not something that's taken.
Very well said.
Yeah,
very well said.
I think that does retroactively revise the narrative of the day. I think we were playing roles. I think it wasn't real.
So let's slightly shift gears and talk about polyamory as well. Because obviously, I think kink and BDSM and polyamory and obviously, politics around LGBTQ, and I mean all these things are intimately it's a web of issues that affect us in a very personal and public and political and emotional way. And I spent years making this film, Monogamish, exploring alternatives to relationships, and it took me kind of 4 years to finish the movie because I had to kind of come to, not a conclusion, because I don't think there's any answers to these questions, but I had to kind of grow enough I had to overcome certain things in my own life in order to finish this film. I remember showing it like a year in, I thought I was done. And I showed it to my mom, who's my biggest fan, of course, thinking like, oh, I'm so, proud of myself for making this movie. And I'd interviewed, like 50 or 60 different academics and sex workers and sex therapists and, just luminaries in the field. And my mom just had this stone cold look on her face of like, no, you gotta get back to the drawing board. How you can't make a film about relationships and have it be a cold intellectual exercise. You gotta try and go a little deeper, right? And it took me 4 years to finally embrace certain things. I overcome the instigating event which was my divorce, which led to making the movie. And kind of really recover from those wounds, and then come to certain conclusions about what I wanted to attempt in my life, which has been now to forego traditional monogamous pair bonded relationships and embrace openness and freedom, and also often overlapping, triads and it's fraught. So I'm curious what your thoughts, each of you, are on kind of breaking out of the couple paradigm and what that means to you. And if you want to go into at all our dynamic here, it would be great. I'm going to leave that to you. But yeah, just opening that door.
I used to have this bird.
Radio silence.
Processing.
I used to have this bird, and I didn't name it because I have a superstition that if I name things, they die. And so I would do this thing. I was like middle school, and I can't refer to it because it has no name, but you just imagine a picture of a bird. Don't think about it, but imagine it. And so this bird, I would love to sleep with it, and I would try to lay down on my side, like on my left side, and I'd put the bird on my shoulder.
I didn't say bestiality. It was one of the things we're going to talk about here.
The problem was,
I thought everything was on the table.
You want open? You're getting open.
Zoophilia. Here we go.
You should have seen me with the rabbits earlier. So I would want this bird to sleep on my shoulder, and it would do this thing that was really annoying. It would turn its tail to face my its tail this way, and it would just poop on my neck the whole night, right?
Oh God.
And I this was understandably less than ideal.
More weird kinks that I just can't really wrap my head around. But go on.
This way. So, do you think my story is not going to have an arc down? Do you think your feeling of lost is not what being lost is not what I'm seeking? Don't drown me out. And so I decided that I was going to get like a kind of like cyclical pair, just all these white shirts that I would wear, and then the bird would just poop on the shirt instead of me, and then I would just be able to clean it in the morning, right? And so I tried this over and over and over every single night, and it turned out the bird just kept turning away from me, and it kept doing this. And so I went to the vet, and I was like, can I just talk about like a real life problem for a second? Why my bird keeps doing this? And the vet said, oh, well, your bird is pair bonded to you. That when two birds are sleeping on the same branch, they face the opposite direction.
Oh.
And they face the opposite direction because it's shared vigilance.
Oh.
It's this idea that you can combine your perceptual like defense and what you learn about the world. You can actually operate almost as if two halves to one side of a brain. And so my bird was just being like, why the fuck do you not like me? Like, I thought we were pair bonded. I'm gonna face away, obviously, while we sleep. And like, so to me that's beautiful. To me that is central and core to the kinds of like this kind of pure emotion and relationship that I actually deep down think I want. But to this point about being like comfortable with discomfort, I am allowing myself to like break out of that ideal version, right? Like I like sleeping facing opposite directions, right? And this is why.
Sure.
This is why.
I thought it was just because you like being Little Spoon secretly. It's true.
There is a hidden submissive side that you're trying to tease out of Patrick. Maybe in a few more episodes we'll get there.
We'll buy a bear trap at the swamp meet. See what happens.
You know, my traps come in a lot more insidious kinds of ways. I'm a woman. A man sets a trap, a woman lures.
So how did you meet? I talked about how I met you, and we've talked about how we've met. No, I don't think I've told the story of how I met Patrick yet. I think we'll save that for another episode because that's a fun one. But
I think if we're in a triangle, you gotta complete all sides of the triangle.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess this is early episodes, time to lay the groundwork of the narrative of interpersonal relations and stories, and so Patrick, you've heard this story many times, and probably you have too. But I have this wonderful group of friends that I made through my former sister-in-law, who is a just wonderfully complex and highly ambitious and intelligent woman that I just look up to so much. And when I met her, she just graduated from Harvard and decided to move into a commune in San Francisco and be a painter. And she did that for a while, and she lived with all these really cool, really smart people. And then I remember her saying that coming from the East Coast and then coming and spending time in LA with me and her sister, my then wife, she's like, yeah, New York is for really smart, really ambitious people. San Francisco is for really smart, unambitious people, and LA is for really dumb, really ambitious people. You get all three of those combinations. Anyway, through her, I made all these amazing friends that all kind of went to Ivy League schools, are scientists and academics and, just writers and doing all very interesting things. And they all, like to go to Burning Man in the early 2000s, late 90s, when it was still kind of felt like a really edgy thing to do. And it felt like a social experiment, which I don't think it does anymore, but I think there was a lot to learn from it. And anyway, so all these people who I affectionately call the Harvard Ravers, once a year go to these dunes, the Eureka Sand Dunes in Death Valley, which feels like the Sahara Desert. And they hike up to the top of the dunes at sunset. And then everybody takes some form of psychedelic and stays up all night looking at the stars and listening to the dunes, because as you kind of slide down the dunes, like they make these amazing kind of whale sounds.
And you try to tell the rest of the story from my point of view?
No.
Try it.
No.
Theory of mind, jump.
No. It's already so hard to tell this story without like going off on a million tangents and spending an hour on it. That's too much of a challenge. I'll let you tell the story from your point of view after.
No, but I want to see.
We can do Rashomon here.
I want to see you in your point of view. I want to see you.
No. That's also too narcissistic. Anyway, a long story short, we'll try that experiment another time. So I was super excited 2 years ago or 3 years ago to be invited to this Dunes trip, which I'd heard about, but I'd never been to, and got to hang out with all these people I so admired and looked up to, and there was all this planning and millions of emails being sent. And the day before it was supposed to happen, they said, sorry, we have to cancel the trip because there's been a flash flood and there's this 10-mile dirt road you have to take in Death Valley to get to the dunes, and calling it off. And in my infinite disappointment, I just tried shooting an email back saying, hey, do you guys all want to come to my place instead? And I have this compound in the high desert of Joshua Tree. And I'd never had 40 people here, but I thought this could be fun. And suddenly all these eccentric, amazing characters descend. Among them, my dear friend, Aaron, who I had been trying to introduce to my then quite, primary lover, Emily. For some reason, I had this instinct that they would get along really well, and there's now a beautiful couple. And Aaron brought
the socialism.
What's that?
The socialism.
The social, and Aaron shows up with a fellow neuroscientist who is Patrick, whose hair structure is reversed. Like he had no beard and a giant afro, and he was wearing like these green spandex shorts. And
I don't remember that detail. That's the only detail.
There was some green, like something weird going on clothing wise that maybe I'm just projecting. We'll have to go back and look at photos one of these days, but. He definitely looked like kind of a mixture of a basketball player. He's tall and a mad scientist. And he suddenly rumor starts to go around that Patrick has a human brain in his car. And everybody becomes very curious about this. People are asking, can they see the brain? And he says, people react very differently than they expect to react when they see a human brain, because it's not only the body part of a dead person, it's perhaps the most important body part of a dead person. And so when you hold the dead person's body part, you could react strongly, even though, you think you might be okay, or you might think you're going to react strongly and not, but you don't know. And so everyone's talking about this brain, wanting to see the brain. Patrick is maintaining a sense of kind of fun mystery around it. After 2 days, the new rumor goes around that the brain is no longer in the car because it was too hot for the brain in the car, and the brain has moved to the sailboat that I craned into this property a year before that. So. Then on the Sunday morning, everyone takes LSD, and now people are really wanting to see the brain. Mm-hmm. And Patrick's like, I am definitely not showing people the brain on acid. That's just too much. But several hours later, I start seeing like little groups of 3 people going into the boat with Patrick leading them. And I think he might have had a headlight on, or he had some sort of like, and anyway, we had then little field trips, 3 at a time, with these wonderful little mini 10-minute lecture about brains. And then since then, Patrick has also come to the Bombay Beach Biennale twice, and given talks there. And he had the best idea he's ever had, to rent a place here for 2 months. And he appeared here ostensibly to quarantine from COVID and not see anyone. Anyway. Sorry to be long-winded, but the story, I'm actually leaving out a lot of fun details, but that's how Patrick and I met, from my point of view.
To be continued.
And us?
Well, we met initially because you came here while I was doing my artist vacation, and you showed all my friends your brain collection, and I was really not on board.
Why
literally not on board the boat.
You didn't want to see the brain.
Well, I mean, I really like dead things in general. Like, I'm not opposed to death as part of the experience of life, or the witnessing of things that are dead. You know, there's something about being preserved in formaldehyde that both freaks me out and apparently makes me hungry. That I just...
At least you didn't say horny.
No. And it just, I don't know. There was something about it that's just a little bit too confusing for me.
But then what happened months later?
Well, you were showing your brain collection to these two really hot girls in bikinis. And I was like, this is adorable. And we ended up talking and just having a really long conversation about all sorts of things, consciousness and spirituality. And I was like, shocked that you didn't like believe in God. I had started reading your manuscript and so I was like reading it and coming back and like doing a bunch of laundry at the house and kind of like going through this cyclical process of like doing a bunch of laundry, reading your manuscript, and then going down and talking to you. It was one of very few circumstances that I was here alone. Everybody was gone. I was kind of holding down the fort while Tao was out of town just briefly. And so strange to be on this compound alone. I'm so used to so many people being here. And so I was like circulating through and, you know, we just ended up talking a lot about a lot of different things. And yeah, neuroscientist and a prince walk into a studio.
And interview Melody at the exact same time.
I'm a lucky girl. Yeah, so I don't know.
I had a funny introduction to the idea of triads way before I knew what polyamory was, or even polyamory existed as a word. I think I don't know when the word was coined, but you know it's a bad formulation because it's like a Greek prefix and a Latin main word, and you're not supposed to mix those two. Supposedly,
we're all mixed.
Yeah, I think it's fine. But my mother had a relationship. I think I can talk about this. My mother had a relationship that was starting when I was about 10 till I was about 17. That was, I know, taken on primarily or in large part to provide a sense of stability to me and my brother. It was a very kind of practical decision to be in a relationship with somebody that kind of balanced out her more anarchic, free-spirited side, because she knew that children need some sense of stability, and so so we had this kind of very proper, you know, upper middle class upbringing after like living from guest house to guest house and like having my mom date many different people. And I remember when in the 5th grade asking a friend of hers if he was going to spend the night, and she had to like pull me aside and say, "Don't ask that question." And anyway, she meets this really wild, eccentric Italian guy at the tail end of this relationship, with the stable relationship, let's call it. And the wild Italian guy meets them together as a couple in Spain. And he says to my mom's serious partner, says, "You know, every man in the world dreams and fantasizes about having multiple women. I think one woman is too much. I think half a woman is much, much more manageable. And what do you say we share her? And why don't you have her 2 months, 2 seasons, you can pick the 2 seasons, and I have her 2 seasons, and she can like come back and forth." And of course her very, not conservative politically, because he was ostensibly a Democrat, but I think his proper middle class American guy was absolutely horrified by this suggestion even. And my mom, of course, was like, why not, right? And anyway, she ended up breaking up with the one guy, marrying the Italian guy. He ended up being an art forger who ended up getting us into a lot of trouble. We lost our house because of him. He went to prison. another amazing story that I'll tell another time. But I that idea of sharing also just like always kind of sat well with me. I find it kind of exciting, the idea of like someone you love being with somebody else and watching her in pleasure and having the freshness of a pleasure that they didn't, that, you know, might be, complementary to the pleasure you can provide. So anyway, I've always enjoyed the dynamic of three. Then since then, I've been in numerous situations with varying degrees of success and also insecurity and pain, and like it's not easy and it's not for everyone. Again, it's like the psychedelics. I think it's like climbing Mount Everest. Like don't do it if you're not prepared, and don't do it if you're not willing to like go through some challenges. But if it feels right to you, I do think that, and also I think we don't want to normalize things too much. We're talking about Simone de Beauvoir the other day, and we should bring her up again. But the idea is we don't want to normalize things to the point that it just becomes part of the expected narrative, because we should always be challenging the expected narrative. That's part of the pleasure of it, I think, and part of the joy is transgression. A friend of mine once said, if sex is fun partly, and part of it's, guilt and transgression, and that's why sex is never fun in Sweden, because they're just too relaxed about it. So it's like, anyway, I'm bringing up a million different points, but the point that I want to narrow in on is the idea that three is an interesting dynamic that's worth exploring if you can handle it. I passed the baton.
and it is a lot of work, though work is like an unfair connotation to what it is. I feel like there's a lot of interesting discoveries that you can make when you kind of open the doors of what you've previously experienced and have new experiences. And though it can be really, really challenging and takes a lot of communication, which has been, for me, one of the most fun things for exploring what's happening between the three of us, because it requires me to be very communicative. It requires me to examine the way that I'm feeling and share it. Because when it's just two people, you can move a little. You have more time, I guess. It feels like you have more time to move slowly, because there's not an observer on what it is that you're experiencing. Inevitably, when there's three, like there can be like a conversation between two people in whatever energetic way that happens, and then there's a third that's an observer, and that goes around and around and around and around, and it seems to accelerate the learning or the challenges. And what I'm saying makes sense. Yeah. And
there's a sociologist in Monogamish who says that there's a fundamental difference between a group of two and a group of three, because if in a group of two, like if there can be no secrets, if someone spills the milk and then in the morning the milk is spilled, we both know who did it. If I spill the milk, I know I did it. If I didn't spill the milk, I know you did it, right? So there's this kind of closed compact, and three becomes politics, he says, because you can have coalitions, you have two ganging up on the other, you can have secrets between two that the third doesn't know. So that's an argument against the triad as being as pure of a connection in some way. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I really do think about this like, I started in on this metaphor with you guys earlier when we were trying to, figure out the where the equilibrium point is. But like, I really think about it as, so in bacterial colonies, if you have two, one, because their reproduction rate is so high, one will always outcompete the other. So if you're on a hillside, or just imagine any space, and you have just two species of bacteria, there's an advantage to one for that given resource. It's not a universal advantage. One is not better than the other, but for the constraints in the environment that they are in, one will dominate and one will completely take over. So you always end up with a monoculture at the end. But if there's three species of bacteria, and each has an advantage and a disadvantage over the other, you get this like, it's called rock, paper, scissors equilibrium, where the three can survive in the most extreme conditions because they are both simultaneously completing one of the other two, but also challenging the strengths of one of the other two in a way that actually achieves something that doesn't exist. You can't have an even number of bacteria species. It has to always be odd. You have to go 1, 3, 5, 7. So whatever that means, fill in the blanks for what that means, like kind of like emotionally or physically and everything else. But it's biologically sound. That's all I can do is give them the little blue check mark of Twitter approval. It's authenticated and verified.
I had a moment. I'm committed to this experiment, and I find it difficult to imagine either demanding or promising monogamy in anywhere in the near future. But I have had moments of doubt, especially recently, just because I've had some heartache, and we had a kind of little breakdown moment where I came in to I hope this isn't sharing too much or being too intimate. We can always cut things out if we want, although I prefer not to, of course. But there was a moment when I came over for breakfast with you guys, and you can kind of like feel Melody's absence, and because you thought that she was thinking her attention might have been a bit more with me, and then she could feel my absence because my attention was with somebody else who's also with somebody else. And I thought, what have we just signed up to just like only cause pain in each other because this is just an impossible scenario?
Yeah, and I was thinking about my dead bird that used to shit on my neck.
And then
everyone just had unrealized potential.
I said to you, and you just looked at me with like such like deep sarcasm and said, what? So is it better for us no one to want anything?
Oh, of course it is.
Oh, you say it is better for nobody to want anything.
You read sarcasm where there was none.
Oh, you're saying it is better for us no one to want anything.
Well, I mean, it's certainly simpler, right?
Right.
So this is what I meant by those little bacteria colonies. They survive only in extreme conditions and are better and can do so on the edges of like extreme volcanic cliffs only because they have that dynamic in equilibrium. Only because there's 3 and not 1 and not 2. Mm-hmm. So to the degree to which you are in an extreme environment right now, kind of figuratively. Mm-hmm.
We
all have our own versions, right?
I mean, I'd say that we are experiencing an extreme environment, not just how.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm good. So
well, I think that anytime
I'm new.
that
You guys are already established in your little colony. You're already on the side of the cliff, you're the two, and I just kind of like airdropped in from the troposphere, a little spore, and I'm just like new in the corner, kind of growing. And the question is,
so that's the question.
What does the hillside look like?
That's what the skeptic would say. Would say that these things only work if it's new, if there's not real depth of emotion, and that the moment you get into like, more deep vulnerability with somebody, it can be playing with fire, and in the worst way. Can you talk about what you told me about Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre? Because I think that's it. It's nice to bring it back a little bit to philosophy sometimes, and I think that their story is so interesting. And you told me about like their students and what happened, and the story that you couldn't tell. If you could just like.
Well, I know a few kind of anecdotal biographical details. So I had a relationship once where we role played, and I was Sartre and she was Simone, and so we investigated quite a bit of the way that their dynamic unfolded, because we found it like intolerable but extremely attractive. Mm-hmm. And part of what they did is they were both kind of philosophy professors in Paris, and they would bring in and effectively like groom young students who they taught sometimes or were nearby, where they of course were intellectual heroes and kind of alphas of the scene, and would just kind of torture them and pass them back and forth and emotionally completely divest from them as anything other than young kind of intellectual playthings. And of course some of the attraction was that you got to teach them philosophy. They got to teach them. And I think there are kinds of people, some of whom love to host and love the young, innocent version of a thing where they can share their worldview through young, innocent eyes. Mm-hmm. And they can teach someone something in their terms, and they can show them their world. And so I think they had like aspects of that. And I think two of their lovers ended up committing suicide. It was like not, this is psychologically a difficult thing to do, to kind of toy with people in this way that can be like a dominant submissive game. To them, it was a game. And of course I'm doing it, I'm sure, emotional disservice. But one thing that was interesting is they had a sharing agreement, right? Share everything. Every time they sleep with anyone else, every time they have feelings for anyone else, share. That's the only way it could work. Complete and open honesty. Except if you read Simone's actual diaries published posthumously, there was one man she loved equally, and it was the only man she didn't tell Sartre about. And that's where it gets interesting.
I'm sure
right?
he could feel it too.
Well, that's the
I mean,
question,
they were together
right?
53 years for the record. Like they were together from early 20s until he died.
But
right?
why that is the one that doesn't get shared? Because it's the thing that everyone's most afraid of. It's the thing that's most uncomfortable. But isn't honesty about the exact moment when you can prove in principle to your partner that it's the most uncomfortable thing that I have inside of me that I will share? Otherwise you're just otherwise it's more pretend than you even realize. I don't know. I think there's this in Don Quixote. There's this story. I think it's Anselmo and Lothario. The impertinent curiosity, where there's a man who has a absolutely perfect relationship. He's married with the woman of his dreams. They met early on. They're together. They live together in perfect intellectual, emotional, physical, sexual harmony, and he cannot get out of his mind over and over and over. Yes, this is perfect. Yes, she is perfect. Yes, I am perfect. Yes, we are perfect. But she has never been tested. She's never been given the option to go somewhere else. She seems happy here. But what would she do if she were kind of teased? What would she do if a male siren, showed up at her door? And so he invites his best friend to come and try to seduce her, because he wants her purity without being tested isn't good enough. And the best friend says, "Are you fucking kidding me? This is going to be a disaster. Why would you possibly do that?" And the metaphor he uses is, he said, imagine you have a diamond in your hand. Imagine you want to be certain that you have a diamond in your hand. What are you going to do? All you can do is you can smash it against something else. And if it doesn't break, you can be certain that thing is harder than the other, right? Back in the day, they didn't have like laser spectroscopy to like test the actual purity of the diamond. So you just had to smash it against another thing. And the diamond, because it was the hardest thing that they knew of, would always win. So you keep smashing this diamond over and over, testing it. But you can only be certain of two conclusions. One, that when it breaks, you did not have a diamond. Or two, that you haven't tested it enough yet. And so what you really, of course, everyone ends up dead at the end. It's like a nice Shakespearean thing. But the message is just kind of like, you can't keep testing the thing looking for honesty. You can't keep this idea of purity, this idea of honesty, even in the most difficult situations, is something that you might never know gets fully tested. Sartre probably died happily thinking that he was the only man that she loved, right? But if he had continually tested that, he probably would have just tortured himself over and over and over. So really getting to like comfortable terms with that discomfort, that you can hold something in your hand that you will never know if it's a diamond or not, because the only way to find out is to test it until you break.
But in a way, the more tests, maybe the more sure you are, right? If you never test it, I draw a different conclusion from your parable.
That was my anecdote and my conclusion.
Okay, on that note, Melody, any last thoughts?
No.
Well, thank you both for this wonderful chat.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I think we should do another check-in in like a month.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds good.
We actually should, no matter
Let's
what.
ask those same questions
No matter what
again.
happens.
Yeah.
Let's do this in a month.
Okay.